The girl kept her eyes down, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped the flour from her apron. The wind outside howled against the barn walls, carrying the scent of dust and summer storms. She didn't dare look up. He was standing right there, broad shoulders, a calm voice, boots that spoke of years spent walking through mud, grass, and hardtack. "I'm not pretty," she whispered. The words escaped her lips before she could pull them back, before her pride could build a fence around her insecurity. She expected silence, or maybe polite pity, but instead, the cowboy's voice came low, steady, and kind. "That's fine," he said. "I need honest, not fancy." Her throat tightened. For a long moment, the sound of the rain against the roof was the only thing between them. He didn't move closer, didn't say it like a line meant to win her heart. He said it like truth, a man too tired of lies to need another. She'd come to his ranch 2 weeks ago, answering a small newspaper ad that said simply, "Cook wanted. Room provided. Honest work. Fair pay." She hadn't expected the man who opened the door, his face sunburned, his eyes tired but steady, his voice softer than his build. She hadn't expected kindness. She'd been turned away from so many doors, her looks always a silent verdict. Too plain, too thick around the middle, too quiet. But the cowboy had just nodded. "You cook?" "Yes, sir," she'd said, clutching her satchel. "Then you start tomorrow. Breakfast at 5. That was all. No judgment, no stare that lingered too long. Just work. Now, as she stood in that kitchen 2 weeks later, she realized how much the silence between them had changed. It was no longer awkward, it was steady, almost comforting. He'd eat his meal, thank her quietly, and go back out to the fields. She'd watch him from the window sometimes, the way he worked, slow, careful, precise. A man who didn't waste effort or words. That morning, she'd caught her reflection in the metal pot while washing dishes. Her hair had come loose, her cheeks red from the stove's heat. She looked worn, tired, ordinary. That's when the words had slipped out, soft but raw. "I'm not pretty." Now, she wished she hadn't said it. But his answer stayed in her mind, echoing even after he left. "I need honest, not fancy." Later that evening, when the storm rolled harder, the power flickered out. The ranch fell silent except for thunder. She grabbed a lantern and made her way to the barn. He'd be there, she knew, he always checked on the horses before calling it a night. She found him kneeling by one of the stalls, a foal trembling beside its mother. "She's scared," he said without looking up. "Storms got her spooked." She crouched beside him. "She's young. Yeah. Doesn't know the world yet. Thinks every sound means danger." The foal's breath came fast. The cowboy gently placed his hand on its neck, murmuring something low. The girl watched the way his hand moved, steady, patient. That was how he did everything. She took a deep breath. "You said you need honest, not fancy," she said quietly. He looked up, the lantern light catching the lines on his face. "Still do." "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced toward the foal again. "Fancy breaks easy," he said. "Honest holds." Her chest ached at the words. He didn't mean them just for her, he meant them for life, for every scar and heartbreak and quiet night alone. The rain eased a little. He stood up and turned to her. "You're honest. I can see that." She looked down, unsure what to do with the way his words settled deep in her chest. "Doesn't make me beautiful," she whispered. He tilted his head. "You sure about that?" She blinked. He smiled. Not wide, not showy, just enough to soften his whole face. "There's a kind of beauty that don't wash off with rain. You've got that kind." For a moment, she couldn't speak. No one had ever told her that before. Not once. Days passed. The storm cleared. The ranch turned gold under the late summer sun. She found herself humming while she cooked now, her shoulders lighter, her laughter returning in quiet bursts. He noticed. Every time she smiled, his eyes softened just a bit more. One morning, she packed him a small lunch and left it by the gate where he always started his rounds. When he found it, he looked back toward the house. She was standing by the door, pretending to sweep. He tipped his hat in thanks. That night, he brought her wildflowers, rough, uneven, freshly picked from the edge of the pasture. She laughed when he handed them to her, her fingers brushing his. "They're not fancy," he said with a grin. "I like them that way," she replied. The days bled into weeks. One evening, after supper, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky burned with orange and pink, and the air smelled like rain-soaked earth. She told him stories about her old life, the people who made her feel invisible, the ones who said no man would ever want her. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he said, "Those folks don't know what it means to need someone real." She swallowed hard. "And what do you need?" He turned toward her. "Someone who don't pretend. Someone who's still here when the storms come." She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. "That doesn't sound like love." He shook his head. "It's better. It's truth." The night deepened. Crickets sang. Somewhere in the distance, the barn door creaked. He stood and offered her his hand. "Walk with me." She nodded, letting him lead her down the worn path toward the pasture. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the field. He stopped by the fence, resting his arm along the rail. "When my wife died," he said quietly, "I thought I needed someone like her again. Polished. Beautiful. The kind who turns heads. But turns out, what I really needed was peace." She listened, her chest tightening at the rawness in his tone. "You bring that," he said simply. She turned to him, tears blurring her vision. "Peace." He nodded. "You make this place feel like home again." The wind blew softly between them. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his hand. It was rough, calloused, but warm. He didn't pull away. For a long moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer empty, it was full, heavy with something real. She thought about the words she'd once whispered. "I'm not pretty." Maybe she wasn't. But she was something better, she was wanted, seen, needed. Not for how she looked, but for who she was. The cowboy turned to her and said quietly, "You don't need to shine to be seen, you just need to stay." She smiled, her heart finally steady. And in that quiet night, under the wide Texas sky, the girl who once thought she wasn't pretty learned that some hearts don't fall in love with faces, they fall in love with truth. The next morning, the sun broke across the plains, painting the sky with gold and fire. The smell of dew and hay filled the air. She woke before dawn, as she always did, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock in the corner. She moved through the kitchen with practiced grace, her hair tied back, her hands already reaching for flour and butter. The biscuits would be ready before he came in from the barn, as they always were. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the morning light slipped through the curtains, or the way her heart felt less heavy. She still remembered what he said the night before, "You don't need to shine to be seen, you just need to stay." The words had wrapped around her like a blanket she didn't know she needed. She smiled faintly as she stirred the batter, humming a soft tune she hadn't sung in years. It was her mother's song, something about rain bringing life again. She hadn't sung it since she'd left home. Maybe she hadn't had a reason to until now. When he came in, boots still dusty, hat in hand, he stopped in the doorway. He watched her for a moment, unseen. There was something in the way she moved, quiet strength, quiet peace. He realized, not for the first time, that her silence was not weakness. It was steadiness. "You're up early," he said finally, his voice breaking the stillness. She turned, a smile flickering on her lips. "Biscuits are better fresh." "Everything's better fresh," he said with a grin. "Even mornings." She chuckled softly. "I never figured you for a morning poet, Mr. Carter." He shrugged, setting his hat on the rack. A man learns to appreciate the small things when he's got land and silence for company. The way he said it made her heart ache a little. She'd seen the loneliness in him before, how he'd stare across the fields like he was talking to someone only he could see. His wife had been gone 5 years. Folks in town said he'd buried himself in work to keep from thinking about her. Maybe that was true. But now, he was looking at her differently, like she wasn't just a worker in his kitchen, but someone who had slowly become part of the life he'd stopped building. They ate in companionable quiet. He thanked her again for breakfast, as he always did, and she watched from the window as he saddled his horse. She noticed small things now, the way his hands moved with precision, the way he paused to pat the horse's neck, the way he looked back at the house before he rode off. After he left, she stepped outside, letting the sun warm her face. The land stretched endlessly before her, rolling hills, fences, scattered oaks. It felt vast and lonely, but beautiful. She'd come here thinking she'd just earn a few dollars and move on. But now, she wasn't so sure she wanted to leave. The town wasn't far. Once a week, she rode in with him to buy supplies. The folks there had learned who she was, the new help at Carter Ranch. Some nodded politely. Others whispered. They always did. That afternoon, she rode with him into town. The wagon rattled over the dirt road, the breeze carrying the smell of wildflowers. She wore her plain blue dress, the same one she'd arrived in. It wasn't much, but she'd mended it carefully, and somehow it felt like her armor now. At the general store, she waited by the counter while he talked to Mr. Wilkins about feed. Two women stood nearby, whispering in low tones. That's her, isn't it? The one staying at Carter's place. Yes, the plain one. Heard she cooks for him. Probably hoping for more. Their laughter was small and sharp. She pretended not to hear, focusing on the list in her hand. When he turned around, he noticed the shift in her posture, the tightness in her shoulders, the way her eyes dropped. You all right? He asked quietly. She nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Just tired. He didn't press, but when they left the store, he stopped by the wagon before climbing in. Don't let folks who don't know your heart tell you what you're worth, he said. Her throat tightened. They weren't wrong, though. I'm plain. He looked at her, really looked at her. Maybe. But plain lasts longer than pretty. She turned her face away, but she couldn't stop the warmth spreading through her chest. He always had a way of saying the right thing without trying too hard. They rode back in silence, the wind lifting her hair, his gaze fixed ahead. But every now and then, he'd glance at her, just to make sure she was still there. As the days turned into weeks, a rhythm formed between them. She cooked and kept the house. He worked the land. They shared coffee on the porch in the mornings, sometimes without words. The quiet between them became something she began to crave. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the crickets began their song, he came in early from the fields. She was kneading bread, flour dusting her hands. He watched her from the doorway, his heart unexpectedly full. Need a hand? He asked. She looked up, surprised. You bake? He laughed. Not since my wife burned the kitchen down trying to teach me. Then maybe you should stay on that side of the table, she teased. He smiled and leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Fair enough. Just needed an excuse to stand here a while. Her cheeks flushed at the honesty in his voice. You don't need an excuse, she said softly. He nodded, his eyes holding hers a moment longer than they should have. Guess I don't. They both knew something had changed between them. It wasn't sudden, it was slow, like rain sinking into dry soil. One night, a letter arrived. It was from her sister in the city, the one who had never understood why she'd left. The words were sharp. You're wasting your life cooking for strangers. You could come home, find a proper husband, live decent. She folded the letter slowly, her heart twisting. She thought about what a proper husband meant, someone who might never look at her the way he did, who might only see her as serviceable, not special. When he found her sitting outside later, the letter still in her lap, he asked gently, bad news? Just my sister, she murmured. She thinks I should leave. He nodded, waiting. She says I could find someone better. He knelt beside her, resting his hand on the railing. Better how? Someone more successful. Someone who looks at me differently. He was quiet for a moment. You want that? She looked up, tears catching the fading light. I don't know. Maybe I'm tired of being told I'm not enough. He nodded slowly. You're enough for me. The words were soft but certain. They hung in the air between them, steady as his heartbeat. She didn't know what to say. You don't have to go, he added. But if you want to, I won't stop you. She shook her head. I don't want to go. Not yet. That night, sleep didn't come easy. She lay awake, listening to the wind, thinking of his words, you're enough for me. The next morning, she found him fixing the fence by the north field. She brought him coffee and stood beside him, watching as he hammered a post back into place. Mr. Carter? She asked softly. He glanced at her. Yeah, why me? He frowned. What do you mean? You could hire anyone. There are younger girls, prettier ones. Why did you choose me? He set down the hammer and wiped his brow. Because you don't just do the work, you care about it. You care about the people who eat your food, the horses you feed scraps to, the way the house feels when you sweep it. That kind of care can't be bought. She blinked back tears. He said it so simply, like it was fact, not kindness. Besides, he added, smiling faintly, I like your company. She laughed softly. You don't talk much for someone who likes company. He shrugged. You talk enough for both of us. Just not always out loud. For weeks after, something wordless grew between them. It showed in small gestures, the way he always left the porch light on when she worked late, the way she kept a clean towel ready for him after the fields, the way their hands brushed and neither pulled away. One evening, when the air was heavy with the promise of rain again, they found themselves walking along the fence line. He was quiet, thoughtful. She felt the tension in the air. You ever think about starting over? He asked suddenly. She frowned. I thought that's what I was doing. He nodded. Yeah, I suppose you are. He hesitated. Would you ever want to start over here? Her heart skipped. Here, on the ranch. He nodded again, slower this time. With me. She stopped walking. The sound of the wind filled the silence. I mean, maybe it's time this house had someone in it who laughs again, he said softly. Someone who fills it with more than quiet. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. You don't have to say that just because you're lonely. He smiled faintly. I'm not lonely anymore. She covered her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. He stepped closer, gently taking her hand. You said once you weren't pretty, he whispered. But you make everything around you better. That's what beauty is to me. Her hand trembled in his, and for a long moment, they just stood there under the gray sky. When the rain began to fall, they didn't move. It wasn't dramatic, no grand confession, no sweeping music. It was just quiet and true, two people who had found something worth keeping. Days turned into months. The ranch came alive again. The porch flowers bloomed, the horses grew fat and happy, and laughter returned to the house. Sometimes she still looked in the mirror and saw the plainness she once hated. But when he wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder, she saw what he saw, a woman who had survived, who had built something honest. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching another storm roll in, he reached for her hand. You ever think about how different it all could have been if you'd listened to those people in town? She smiled. Maybe. But then I wouldn't have found the one man who doesn't need fancy. He chuckled softly. Guess I wouldn't know what to do with fancy if I had it. You'd probably break it, she teased. He grinned. Maybe. But you, he squeezed her hand, you're built to last. The wind picked up, and she leaned against him, their fingers intertwined. The world outside could say what it wanted. She no longer cared, because the man beside her didn't fall in love with beauty that fades. He fell in love with truth that stayed. And that, she realized every morning she woke beside him, was worth more than all the pretty words in the world. Still, even after years, sometimes she'd whisper it again, half out of habit, half to test if it still mattered. I'm not pretty. And every time, without fail, he'd smile and say, good. I don't need pretty. I've got honest. And that was the only truth she'd ever needed to hear.